Hello, this is the second video in the session of chapter 1 to 6, and in this particular video, like it says here, we're going to focus on chapter 3, a disappointment. This chapter, like the name says, it's about how people are disappointed of a certain thing, of a certain result, of a certain outcome, and that is precisely what the word means, right? When you don't receive or when you don't attain your targets, you're disappointed. And so people in England at that time, they were disappointed because what they were expecting of the case, it turned out a bit differently for them, and they did not get to see the treason case punishment, which by the way which was a very upsetting news for them at that time. We have discussed this before in the classroom as well, that these people, they really had their high, hopes up high that they're going to see Charles Darnay being tormented and tortured. And we read about that particular scene where Jerry Cruncher was talking to one of the visitors in Old Bailey Court, and he talked about how he is expecting the punishment, the quartering punishment precisely, and how it's going to be a very, amusing sight for them. So that's particularly a criticism of in the society at large. And with this, I'm going to move to the next slide, where we're going to look into exactly what's happening in the case. I'm not sure if you can read what's written here, but I'll try to cover everything in detail as much as possible. I'll also share this on your Google Classroom so that you are able to go through it again. So this case is primarily Charles Darnay versus John Bursard. Like we discussed before, John Bursard is or was Charles Darnay's friend, right? And he claimed that even though they are best friends or they have been friends, he can't really betray his country for the sake of his friendship. And and this is why he's here in the court to tell about what Charles Darnay does in his free time and what is his profession. Uh, he further claimed that Charles Darnay was a French spy and he was sending documents back to France, and he was exchanging papers with the French gentleman. His argument was further supported by Roger Clay. He was John Bursard's servant, and previously he has worked for Charles Darnay, so he was one of the major witnesses in this case. And he came forth in the court and he talked about how he has been, noticing strange behavior, strange actions of Charles Darnay when he was working with him, and how he, endorsed whatever Charles Darnay has done. Uh, Basically, he endorses John Bursard's statement, and he says that this man Charles Darnay, he has been involved in some suspicious activities, and I did find a few letters and some papers in his coat and in his drawer. And so the case moved forward. The Attorney General at that time, he then calls Mr. Jarvis Lorry. Mr. Jarvis, we all know he is a worker in Kelson Bank, right? And in this case, he's called to identify whether Charles Darnay was there in the Dover Mail. Remember the Dover Mail from chapter 2? This is what they're talking about. Book 1, chapter 2. We talked about how Jarvis Lorry was traveling in Dover Mail from London to Dover, and they want him to identify whether this man was there in the coach with him and he was traveling. So Jarvis Lorry couldn't confirm that, and then they asked him whether he has seen this man before. And then Jarvis Lorry, being the honest man he is, he tells the court that he has absolutely seen this man before, but not in the Dover coach. He has seen him when he was coming back from France to England again, after the case that happened with Dr. Menet. So when he was bringing back Dr. Menet to England, this is when he encountered this particular man, Charles Darnay. And then we see the testimony by Lucy Menet. We all know that Lucy was with Jarvis Lorry when he traveled to France. So when they were coming back, of course, she was coming back with him. And this is where she met Charles Darnay for the first time. She's going to tell the court in detail about how she met him and what they discussed. And even though she didn't want to hurt Charles Darnay, like she said, but being naive and innocent she is, She talked about all those things that she shouldn't have said in the court. She talked about how Charles Darnay was traveling under an assumed name. She talked about how Charles Darnay was going to, meeting the French gentleman, how the French gentleman came on board in the mid of the night, and they exchanged some papers and everything. So on and so forth. And they also talked about how George Washington III, George Washington would be the great name in history like George III. So I think all of these pointers that Lucy Monet talked about, they pointed against Charles Darnay, and they kind of supported the treason case. Anyway, so the last testimony was of Dr. Monet, Lucy Monet's father, and the court calls him, of course, on the platform, and then he tells them clearly that he was not in the stable condition, so he doesn't really remember anything, and that is where the court asks him to go back and sit down. And now the all the evidences have been against Charles Darnay, so everyone was hoping that this man would be hanged or being quartered. But then Mr. Stryver came up with this unique idea, which by the way wasn't his. He again called John Barsard on the stage, and he called Charles Darnay and he asked him whether he remembers this man or not, and then is he sure that this is the man? And then he came forward with his claim that you know the man sitting in the crowd, Sidney Carton, is actually a local like of Charles Darnay. So John Barsard, how can he be sure that this is Charles Darnay and that is the criminal that he's talking about? So this the case becomes vague, and then they have to let Charles Darnay go. And we also got to know in this chapter that John Barsard was himself a French spy. Last but not the least, please remember this, that it was not Mr. Stryver who basically won the case. It was Sidney Carton who used his wisdom to win the case in the end. So this is it for chapter 3. And I hope you liked the video. If I went too fast, I'm gonna record it again for you, so please let me know if it's good enough or not. I'm gonna post this illustration as well as this video on your Google Classroom as well, so please make sure you go through it. Thank you.